something that when people come to this door and they knock on it while you're in a session, right? You want them to question their very existence. You want them to feel so bad about themselves that they'll never do it again. So what do you put? Because if it's just don't disturb or do not enter, that's no fun, right? That's not intimidating. There's no challenge there. I want it to be an existential threat. So
something that what you really want to.
all ye who enter fear, right? Or I don't know. Anyways,
that sounds. I was going to just put a simple recording in progress.
Recording it. What? That's it?
Yes, very simple recording. Yes, because I expect people to have
to be decent.
Yes, to have a sense of propriety.
Well, I would expect the same too, and they probably would actually adhere to the message. It's just not near as fun. Recording in process or knock on this door and run for your life. Right? I prefer that. I don't know. Maybe we can't get away with this. I think we've begun, by the way. So This is really telling a lot about who we are. Welcome. Welcome to the Reformation Room, my friends. It's good to be with you here today. I wasn't being serious, a little bit, but we have to find that middle ground, find the right sign. We do, you do podcasts, you do recordings, and you'd be surprised how often people just, when you're doing them in a college too, where we are here, how often people want to find their way to this door and somehow have to knock and want to enter. And it's just a whole ordeal. So I'd rather find the right slogan that ends it once and for all. But anyways, good to be here with you again, Rebecca. Yeah. You know what's interesting though? We look the exact same as our last session.
Well, I don't know whether it's...
You could have told me that you were going to dress identically this week.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that we found ways to vibe together over time.
I like that.
Yeah, so...
it's a good Gen Z term.
Well, this is a podcast in the Gen Z era.
It's a very trad thing of you.
Yeah, what do you expect?
I don't even know how to use these words. Well, this is probably a product of we're recording the sessions back to back. We have a tendency of doing this for all of our listeners. We've recorded most of this over the period of a couple weeks. So and even the remaining sessions are going to be done all in the period of the next couple days. It's been a lot of work. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. We've been here in Nigeria, up in Jos, Nigeria, at our Bible college, and we've been recording ever since we moved in here and had our classes kind of formally enter into the college. So we've been doing these podcasts at the same time, and we're doing them, every other day or every couple of days, and doing a number at a time, so we can slowly release them throughout the course of next year. It takes a lot of time, and especially when you're running a school and then you're also teaching in the school, you have to find time.
You really have to find that time
when you can do this. And I know there's some podcasts out there and sessions where you have time weeks. You can do one every 2 weeks and just focus on that for the time. And we don't have that time. But we are trying to redeem the time. Keep it biblical, my brother.
Yes, we are trying to redeem the time.
Amen. In fact, you redeem the time by learning what's happened in time so that you know how to make the most of your time.
I couldn't have said it better, man.
No, and I probably will never say it that well again either.
Yeah, because like we've said over and over and over again, sometimes it's funny when you see or hear some things that people put out there. Some of the actions, and it's like this is deja vu. These things have happened before, and they keep still happening over and over and over. Then sometimes you hear somebody in one remote village spout one heresy, and then you look back at church history and you're like, but somebody said this exact thing, and this person couldn't have read it because, hey, like we said, they're one remote village, right? Yeah. But somehow we keep, as humans, maybe it's our human nature. Sure. These things keep reoccurring, and people keep making the same mistakes. Yeah. And for me, I'm hoping that for those people that are listening and watching, or that some of these conversations sparks them to go and read themselves, right? It will help them to, like you pointed out when we started, redeem the time. There are some mistakes in life that people say experience is the best teacher, but I ask myself sometimes, is it? Is it when I have the same experiences that I learn? Can't I learn from the other person's experiences?
Yeah.
There's this saying we have in Africa here that when you see your neighbor's beards on fire, the wise thing to do is to douse yours with water. Now, the thing is this: it is not that the proverb is saying that run away and don't try to help. What it's saying is that it presupposes that you would want to help this person. But it's saying that since you have seen from their experience that
Learn.
yes, having a dry beard is predicates you to easily be engulfed with fire. But what it also lets you know is that learn from his experience, take precautions. So I'm hoping that those people that listen to us and those people that are or would have to read moving forward from now, that these things would help them. Begin to learn how to take precautions.
Absolutely.
These things have happened before. Some of them will still happen again. But why should you fall victim when we live in a day and age where we have so much information? We have so much information about the past. We have so much information about our present. And lots of people are building lots of information for the future. Why fall victim to the same issues when you could have just taken precaution?
You put that well. It reminds me of the title to one of Francis Schaeffer's books, How Then Shall We Live? Right? And that's the reason we're doing this more than anything. It's so that in some way we can be a blessing, a challenge, a help to our brothers and sisters, to those who are asking the questions, who want to understand, want to know their faith, who want to understand the culture, the world, the times we live in, all these kinds of things, so that you know how to live and how to live well. Right? You live in a world that is governed by ideas. Right? The engine, the fuel of the world is ideas. Right? And of course, God governs all things, but God created ex nihilo, out of no matter. He used his ideas, his thoughts. And this is then a world governed by spirits and beings who think. And so it's the ideas, as we say, the ideas have legs. So you need to know the ideas, and you need to know where the ideas come from if you're going to know what you're up against and how to respond, and then how to live well as a Christian in a fallen world, as a Christian in a time and maybe in a place, depending where you are right now. But we have to know, okay, I'm the minority here. How do I live? How do I raise my family in this situation when the culture and the ideas that dominate it and have created it are extremely hostile to me, my family, and our faith? Right? Or what do we do if we find ourselves where we're the majority, where most Christians actually do agree, but there's still corruption and there's still all kinds of problems? Sin's always going to be there, at least on this side of eternity, but there's ideas that creep into the church all the time that have no standing in Scripture, but have come from the Greeks, the Romans, or the modern atheists themselves, right? Or some other thinker. And it's entered into broader Christianity, into the church, and then accepted. So we as Christians, we're in this world, and it's a fallen world, a world that is fallen but being redeemed, and it's a world that is moved on and by ideas. So we need to know these ideas and understand them well. And I'm reminded from what you said again. You mentioned it last week. But in our previous session, Solomon. Solomon is the original philosopher. I mean, I guess Adam was. We just don't have Adam's writings. But Solomon is, the original philosopher, and he's one of the greatest, other than Christ himself. Solomon, as he's doing philosophy in Ecclesiastes, right? You see him explaining what he's lived out, and he opens it up with what? It's all vanity. It's all vapor. Is really what the word is, right? It's smoke, vanishes. The theme of the book is, if you want to believe that God doesn't exist, if you want to act, more importantly, as if God doesn't exist, then you'll get your comeuppings. You'll get your justice. It'll come around. But if it doesn't come around, then the righteous man shouldn't be worried about it. Don't be freaking out if the unjust and the unrighteous don't get their due justice, because they will. It will all happen in God's time. So eat your bread, drink your wine, right? Enjoy the wife of your youth, as he says over and over in the book, right? Enjoy the normal daily things in their right place, because this life is full of sorrow, it is full of pain, it's a heavy burden God has laid on man, he says in the book. God's aware of that, right? And it's very confusing. And one of the things that is confusing about life, and Solomon hits this over and over, is life is repetitious. You wake up, you eat, you drink, you go through the same things, you go to sleep, and it's the same over and over and over. The sun sets, the sun rises, the sun sets, right? This is life. So there's no evil that's new. What's interesting is that goodness does seem to take new forms, but that's a different conversation. I want to kind of pull this back to our conversation from last week.
Okay.
Right? This idea now that nothing new repeats. Because as you identified, I think very well at the end of our session, everything we've been discussing, you're like, yeah, I've seen this before. And I'm seeing it in my day and age again. It took different forms.
Yeah, basically that's it.
Yeah. Right. And so in the person of David Hume, like I want to bring us back to that. Right. Because if you kind of recall, Hume is the one who now legitimizes something like an atheism because knowledge is not possible. Right. Now it's going to be more intellectually verifiable, or what's the word, justifiable, to remove yourself from the church more formally, whether Protestant or Roman Catholic at the time, because we've had, one of the most brilliant thinkers of our time prove that we can't know anything, let alone that the Bible is true or anything like this.
Yeah.
Right? So Hume opens a very, very interesting door, and a very unfortunate door in many ways. And I'm not here to go and talk about Hume and his religion and his personal piety and such and such.
No, but I'm thinking that our viewers would also be interested to note that Hume came from a very strong Presbyterian background.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, we are not going to go into why and how he may have lost his faith, but it's interesting to note that this is, like we pointed out, most probably a product of something that the church didn't handle properly.
Yeah, even in the Scottish Presbyterianism there, I mean, you have great reformers and thinkers like John Knox and Samuel Rutherford. But you also have a lot, and this is, we talked about it last week, right? It's common still in the church today. There's great teachers, and then there's people who are in the pulpit because it's a job. There's people in the pulpit because they wanted the authority. There's a whole number of reasons.
Yeah,
Again,
true.
the church has sin in it too, and sometimes it's tolerated far too much. But in those days and age, even if there wasn't necessarily a wolf in sheep's clothing in the pulpit, again, there's still sinners there, and there's still men who are, and that time, because of the cultural aura, the milieu, it's much more. You have someone amidst the congregation or amidst the group who is challenging the status quo, challenging the idea. It's far more common you just denounce and get rid of, right? You separate, you break ties. Right, that's more common following the period of the Reformation. Okay, this was a fear Luther had. This is why Luther, of course, didn't want to separate. He understood once it happens one time, right, it can proliferate.
Yeah, true.
Right now, that's happened in the Reformed Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church for different reasons and similar reasons. It's happened, even if they still claim Roman Catholicism as the banner. There's many, many disagreements and branches. Right? They've just denounced those that they say aren't the true Roman Catholics. But that happened in Protestantism too. That's happened in Presbyterianism. It's happened in the Puritans. It's happened within Anglicanism. It's happened within Baptist circles and on and on. Right? We as I won't quote him. I was going to quote a figure I really like, and he just says, "We're none of us perfect." Right? But that's a really strong way of making the point. You enter Europe, right, in the 1700s now, late 1700s, or working towards the early 1800s. This figure kind of enters the scene, who is a reaction and a response to David Hume, right? And there's a number of figures, but the big one that we do need to mention, at least in these sessions, is Immanuel Kant. Because Kant is coming from a German Lutheran background, very pietistic home. So morality is a deep concern for him. So he has a strong understanding of natural law. And social morality is actually very important to Kant. Now Kant is, he's receiving Hume, right? And his now not directly, he receives it actually as an intermediary figure, how he comes to understand Hume, a Christian, actually Haman. But he reads Hume and he recognizes the problem very clearly that, okay, we're left in skepticism, pure skepticism. Knowledge is not possible. So ultimately that's going to then, that's going to just headlong lead us into atheism, ultimately. Kant provides a foundation for knowledge that is rooted in the self. He's a rationalist still in many ways. He's the consummation of the rationalist, the European rationalist tradition. But he does it a bit differently than the previous rationalists. He brings empiricism and rationalism together.
Okay.
Right? And rather than saying, no, the starting point is one or the other, it's both and. It's the same, they happen simultaneously. You receive your what you know from sensation. It does indeed begin, in a sense, empirically, but you have an a priori framework that is your mind. It's not, we can't say your mind has a framework. No, your mind is the framework. That's what it is. Your mind is a set of categories that are systematically linked together, right? And he has, I forget the exact number, but the categories are the basic concepts of all thought and communication. We cannot do without them. We cannot exist without them. We cannot think without them. We cannot know without them. We cannot communicate without them. Nothing. They are, as he calls them, transcendentals. Transcendental ideas, categories, a priori categories. They're the categories, for instance, of quantity, the categories of space and time, right? The absolute foundational building blocks of existence. That's also the framework that the mind is. And that's what allows the mind to tap into the world. The mind is the foundation of the mind is the same foundation, metaphysically speaking here, and physically in another, both. I don't want to get too confusing. Right? Just for our sake, the foundation of our being, our mind, is the same foundation of the world. Right? It's kind of like two ends of a spectrum, and they end up linking together. That's how we can come to know the world. So we learn it through sensation. It comes in, and then the mind categorizes. Right? So that right now, as I'm looking around this room, as I'm looking at you, okay, what I've sensed is all kinds of different things, but my mind has framed it into the image, the coherent image that I'm taking in. So that you make sense to me. What's important here is he has these two concepts called the phenomena and the noumena. Okay, the phenomena are the things as they appear. So right now, what you are to me, the concept, the mental construct that my mind has fashioned you into, so that it makes sense to me. This is phenomena. Okay. But the thing in and of itself, the real world,
the essence,
what is really going on here? The noumena, I don't know. I have no idea. That's not presented to me. I can't experience that. I can't sense it. It's intangible. It's a world I cannot access. So all I know, and all every human being knows, is the world as it appears to them. So this is a truth.
That's what you're saying, is that for everybody, or is it for most people, the phenomena is what is essentially the focus of I won't say of our reality, but it's what we easily experience. While the essence, which is a noumena now, is something that is more personal. I'm just saying, so you make that clarification.
Really clear. Yeah, no, it's not even personal. The noumena is unknown to you.
Okay.
Things in and of themselves, the world as it is unknowable to human beings.
Okay.
All we can know is the world as it appears.
As it appears to be.
Right? And so again, science we can use an example from science here. If I study, if I get a microscope and I start studying and I get something, I put it under the microscope and I see it close up.
Okay.
What do I see? Almost across the board, especially as I get, zoom in. I see things moving, little particles. The smaller you get, more you see particles, but different stages, you just see things in motion, right? But as you zoom in, it changes, doesn't it? Right? What you look like to me right now, if I got a microscope and zoomed in on your forehead, right? I can see the sweat from the light right now on your forehead, and I can see the consternation in your face, and I can see you as you present, as my mind is presenting you to me. But if I get a microscope and I zoom in more, you're going to look radically different. In fact, I'm going to find out that the reason that there's sweat on your forehead is because there's a lot of action going on there. There's a ton of movement, right? There's a lot of particles moving, creating friction. It's getting hot. Well, those particles don't look like you. And as I zoom in on those particles more, what makes those particles doesn't look like the particles. And the smaller I go, right, the closer towards infinity, as if there's such a possibility of being closer towards infinity, right? But the smaller I go, the more things just continue to change. So what do you look like really? I have no idea. I only know what is presented to me from this perspective, right? The perspective I have at this moment. What I'm looking, the senses I'm receiving at this moment, that's how I know you. But if I got a microscope and I saw a different series of senses, impressions, as it were, coming on me, right, from the outside world, at a microscopic level, well, then that's what you look like. But I don't know you in and of yourself. I don't know what you actually look like. I don't know what the world behind the world, right? The thing that's producing our world. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know the matrix, as it were.
Okay. So is all of this coming from David Hume, or is there another philosopher that has helped us systematize these thoughts the way you're presenting it?
So Immanuel Kant responds, a bit of both, to David Hume.
Okay.
He presents this. This is his masterpiece. This is his synthesis of European rationalism, and which is rooted in Greek rationalism and then British empiricism, right? Now Immanuel Kant says we can have knowledge. It's just not knowledge like the previous rationalists and empiricists thought.
Okay.
Right? They thought they could have knowledge of the real world, even if it was maybe probability, but it's genuine knowledge of the real world. Kant cuts that. No, you cannot have real knowledge of the real world in and of itself.
Okay.
All I know is the world as is presented to me.
Yeah.
This is his solution, right? And it synthesizes the rationalism and the empiricism together. I think you can already see this. Hopefully our audience can see this. Well, it's an answer. The question is, does it satisfy? Maybe it will satisfy you perhaps if you're contented living in the matrix. I mean, let's continue the analogy. Because Kant is kind of giving the foundation for this whole concept of, different realms and matrix operating side by side, and we're not really in tune with the real world, and it's all a construct. Really important. I want to keep on that word. Hopefully, our audience is already pinpointing this, right? It's a construct. My mind's constructing everything that as I see it. Somebody like Kant might say, well, your mind is constructing it based on what's really there. Very simple response. How do I know what my mind is constructing is the same as what your mind is constructing? And in fact, what we generally know from talking to other human beings is we disagree a lot. Maybe we disagree because we are actually taking in very different realities and we don't see it the same at all. And our memory images aren't the same at all. How would we ever know that any of us are actually taking in the reality the same way?
Yeah, but is that not the same reason why the mere fact that both of us as unique individuals are taking in the information around and processing it differently, that we need certain absolute standards? Is that not the same reason why?
Well, we would need those if we were to have certainty that we are taking in the same reality. Okay. Right? We'd have to have an agreement on what those absolute standards are, those absolute categories. We'd also have to agree that there's something really creating a world out there that's holding this world in existence. Okay. For instance, Descartes, he looks at the world and says, and all these good philosophers understood, I have no way of knowing that this world outside of my mind exists. Now let's see if I can explain that it does exist and that it's real. So they attempt different ways to prove that there is a world outside of just my being, outside of my mind.
Okay.
Well, then the question becomes, how do I know that world is stable, that it's actually there, and it's really existing, and it's continuing to exist, right? Again, the old adage or the old question, right? A tree falls in the forest, there's no one around to hear it. Does it make a noise? It's a paradox, right? It's hard to answer. No one can really give an answer because no one's there, right? Well, here, these philosophers step it up a notch, right? Berkeley, or Barclay, technically, I guess, he says it best. If there's a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, doesn't make a noise, he goes a step back. He says, if there's no one around the forest, how do we know the forest even exists? Is Antarctica existing right now?
Yeah.
Right? If no one's there perceiving it, how do we know it's even real? Right? So this is where Kant, he steps in and he kind of takes a lot of these ideas, and what he says ultimately is, you don't know. There is no world, or at least you don't know the world in and of itself. In fact, you can take Kant another step, right? We don't even know if there's a world in and of itself. It could be that there's nothing more than appearance. And then let's play this out. If there's nothing more than appearance, even if all we can know is the world as it presents itself, the world as we perceive it, again, the phenomena, that's all we can know. Everything becomes, it's based on me, right? So he's a culmination of these humanists, and now he is the one developing, right? Hume kind of obliterated the house of the rationalists and the empiricists, these humanists who had been developing systematically the original Renaissance humanism, right?
Okay.
So you have the Renaissance humanists, the reformers are one branch, and then you had this other tradition, right? The humanists specifically. They are brought together by Descartes and other philosophers, systematizing all their ideas and their developments. Let's give it a foundation. Let's make it comprehensive, an explanation for all of life, a theory for everything. They fail, according to Hume. Hume tears it down, right? There's nothing here, guys. You're left in no knowledge at all. And primarily, and even Hume acknowledges this, because God's not a part of your system. Hume is not about to make God a fundamental part of his system. I say that tongue in cheek because there's things you read in Hume that make you wonder if he's actually just tearing it all down, but meanwhile he knows that, no, the truth isn't God. Point is, I'm not going to go down that road, different conversation.
Yeah.
But Hume tears it down and leaves us, we have nothing, just opinion. Now go on your merry way and live your life. Okay, well, that leads to some pretty bad things when it's merely opinion. So Hume and Humean ideas, Humean skepticism, we can call it, is a foundation of Western society today. Okay, it's a key part of what makes Westerners, and then the globalist ideas that are coming out of the Western world and transmitting all over this continent where we see them here. Skepticism is a big part of that. We encounter it here in Nigeria now, especially as people find themselves in the universities. Whereas it's not as native to African culture to be highly skeptical.
Very
right?
true.
It's not.
Very
no,
true.
Africans more generally, right? Faith, belief, trust in authority especially. So skepticism has more roots in Greek culture, in Greek atheism, and it finds its resurges here with Hume. Yeah. It's always maintained a small strand, but it comes back in Hume. So Hume leaves us then with nothing, and then Kant steps in and says, I'll save the day. I'll bring empiricism and rationalism together, but guess what? All of your attempts failed, right? All you other rationalists, empiricists, you other Renaissance humanists, your attempts all failed. Your humanism failed. It's the wrong kind of humanism. No, we need to ground our knowledge solely in ourselves, remove God entirely from the realm of knowledge. Kant has a small place for a deity, and it more in the realm of morality. Okay. But when it comes to knowledge and epistemology, the deity, the divine being God, is removed entirely now, no place, and we ground everything in us. Since everything's grounded in us, guess what? You cannot know the world in and of yourself. Berkeley was right. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, tree, the forest, they don't even exist. Right? And more than that, right? All you know is what is impressed upon you, and then what your mind categorizes it into. And again, Kant would like to say that it's universal. He'd like to say that what a Mecca perceives here and what Joshua perceived are the same thing, or relatively the same thing, because our categories are the same. But you can't prove that. And life experience might actually indicate something quite different.
Yeah, and I'm sure viewers, you as you listen to this things, your minds are going around, because some of these conversations you ask yourself, so where do we finally end? Where do we finally go to? Like he's pointed out, Hume will make you become so skeptical. There's nothing that exists. Like, there's no reality. Even when you think you know something, you don't really know it. And then Kant will say, okay, we can actually know these things together, because there are certain functional categories that every one of us has to share. For instance, we all know that this is a chair, right? That's what he's trying to point out to us, that irrespective of whichever society you come from, we all know that there are certain things that would constitute a chair. And when we find it either in Europe or in Africa or wherever, we know it's a chair.
Sure.
Yeah. If I know that if a man donates his sperms and is willing to take care of a child, then we can call it its father. And so vice versa for the mother. And it's the same in America, in Africa, in Asia, wherever. So that's Kant. Kant is saying, look, irrespective of what it looks like, there are certain categories that are common to all of us. So once we agree on those categories, then we can all know, or we can safely conceptualize certain ideas. Is that not what you're saying?
The phenomena, right?
Yeah, the phenomena, yeah.
The things as they appear to us.
Yes, exactly.
We can know them in common. Of course, he can't explain that, or better, he gives an explanation, but he doesn't have a grounding to say that universally phenomena is the same.
Okay.
Because he doesn't. Again, once everything is built on me now, built on my experience, built on my perception of the phenomena.
Okay.
Right? Kant's whole analysis is based on his understanding that he's his starting point, and his starting point is his phenomena. So he's making a universal generalization about the whole world based on the phenomena as it's presented to him, but he doesn't know that it's actually even real, or that it's how the world actually is, or that it's the same with you. Right? None of that's been proven. None of that's been given any kind of grounding. It's just assumed. But he has no reason to assume it, because it's all beginning with me. Right? If it all begins with me, why on earth do I have reason to believe that it's going to be the same in you when we all disagree so much? Right? So yeah, that's where Kant leaves us, right? And that opened the floodgates.
Yeah, but would you say that where Kant leaves us is better than where Hume leaves us? Hume leaves you with the sense that I only know things the way they seem to be. I don't know what they really are. And then
Kant says that too. That's what Kant says, right? Hume's saying, no, you really just don't know anything.
Yeah.
Right. The best you have is probability, but you really can't prove your probability, because empiricism, step by step, doesn't make sense. Impressions are turned into perceptions, which are turned into memory images. It's a blank slate. How does this happen? Right. So he just kind of annihilates it and says, it's opinion. That's it. Kant saying, yeah, no, you can know, but you just know it as it appears to you. So your question is interesting. I have to think for a second. Whose is better? But I would say confidently Hume. Hume leaves us in a better place. Not better place, in a more honest place.
Okay.
Because Hume takes these empirical epistemologies that are being built, again, on senses without God, and he dismantles them. So he helps Christian apologists. One of the things I love studying the philosophers for is that even when they're not believers, they're first of all, their thinking is always very profitable, just to refine your own. But number two, very often the beast is suicidal, and they're dismantling each other. Right? They're very helpful for Christians to understand how they think, because I like studying the honest atheists. Okay. Hume is an honest atheist. I'm not going to whether whether he actually is or not isn't the point here. His understanding of knowledge is atheistic, to say the least. So most likely he would have been then. And he's very direct and just simply says, no, we're wrong. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know anything with certainty. We really don't know. If you're going to build a system outside of God, that's where you end up. You end up in absolute meaninglessness. You end up in skepticism. You end up in solipsism. For our audience, solipsism is this idea that Bishop George Berkeley draws out very beautifully, that if, again, God doesn't exist, and since your mind, everything begins with your mind, well, how do you know that it's not just all a production, an emanation from your mind, right? He's challenging the empiricists, and because the empiricists all say, no, impressions come into the mind, but Berkeley's saying, no, they go out. You have no way of proving that they're coming in. In fact, it would make more sense if it all begins here, and you know it as ideas in your mind, because that's what your mind knows, ideas. It would make more sense, according to Berkeley, that your mind is producing the ideas. Your mind produces the world around you. So everyone else then is ultimately a figment of your imagination, right? I am God, and you are all my world. Now that's atheism. Berkeley's not embracing that. He's very, very noticeably pinpointing it and saying, if you want to go this way, this is the product. This is where you end up.
Okay.
Right? So he's very useful, very profitable for Christians to read, to understand where atheism leads. Right? We have to understand the ideas that they're proselytizing. Right? They lead into solipsism. They lead into atheism, skepticism, as David Hume has shown us. Or if you go Kant's direction, see Kant, and this is why I said I prefer Hume. Kant's not as honest, I don't believe. And not that he's not trying to be. It's just I find Hume more honest and more truthful.
Okay.
In that Kant's still right. If you begin with the self, you're never going to get the world as it is. The most you get is the world as it appears to you.
Which is true.
Which is true.
Yes.
If God doesn't exist, that's all you're ever going to get. Which is the same thing Berkeley's saying. It's just the world as you perceive it, as your ideas coming from you. But why I find Kant less honest, and again, just not as where he leaves us isn't as good as I believe where Hume leaves us, is because Kant is still trying to claim that he can present us with a system of knowledge, that you can know something, even if it's just the phenomena, that you can have security in that knowledge, that we can have ways of justifying our true beliefs. These true beliefs are true phenomena, not the things in and of themselves, but I can justify it, and it's true, at least as phenomena.
Okay, so how did the church, especially the Reformed Church, as we know it today, how did they develop ideas to counter some of these very, very interesting conversations?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and that I think really naturally moves us into perhaps one of the final parts, at least in this broader series. The church struggled. We have to start there and be very honest. The Roman Catholic Church had a terrible approach.
Okay.
Prohibited index of books, denounce, right? And that's it. There are some within the Roman Church who are naturally and more rightly concerned about these things.
Okay.
They respond, but the Roman Church as a whole does not, other than denunciations and councils that just to send ban this, prohibit this, and bad this, right? As opposed to replying and giving a systematic apologetical response.
Wow.
In the Protestant churches broadly, you do find more responses. You see pastors engage, not just pastors engaging it. You find, again, even a lot of the thinkers who are, I guess, some of the philosophers at this point and theologians, they're more coming from these traditions now, especially in Western Europe, coming out of England and Switzerland and the Netherlands and Germany and then America. Right? These are more coming from Protestant traditions than Roman Catholic at this point. But while there's a development, there still is not, when I say development, in the late 1700s into the early 1800s, there's a revival that had happened earlier. Jonathan Edwards, of course, the First Great Awakening, and George Whitefield as well. There's revival happening amongst people, and that's, again, more religious focus and such. But these ideas are developing, and they're having an influence, and there's not a systematic, comprehensive Christian response. There just isn't. The best you get are, again, thinkers like Jonathan Edwards, but he's relegated again into the American colonies. He's in a time and place where America is not unified like it is today. He's also in the New World. He's not in Europe, where a lot of these ideas are, again, a lot of thinkers, the old institutions, right? They have the fund, not just the funding, but they have the culture already, right? They're not having to develop a new world. So in the New World, the focus at these early years, at this time we're talking about late 1700s, early 1800s now. In the New World, the focus is more on survival, right? Building a world, right? And of course, the American Revolution happens and such. But in Europe, then you have more. Again, you have a lot of the Protestants and such. There's responses that come later, but at this period in time, you don't see systematic, comprehensive, biblically rooted responses to Hume, to Kant. You see Christian responses in the form of people like Adam Clarke. He's in the 1700s. People like Hamann. He's also in the 1700s. You later into the early 1800s. Right, in the realm, again, of philosophy and the academics, you have people like Soren Kierkegaard, and Kierkegaard is a Christian, but his response is
basically existentialism.
Well, he really is the father of it, right? And his response is no response in many ways. He's not giving a reason. He's not providing an apologetic in response, and one that's certainly based in Scripture. No, his response is actually more to embrace that the conclusions of these thinkers are right. And so as Christians, we have to, again, we move towards this, what they call the Kierkegaardian leap, this leap of faith, again, which leads into fideism and emotionalism. Kierkegaard is actually also a father of a lot of the emotionalistic problems in the church today. But to step back, basically, you don't see a comprehensive response from the church. You see a church that's struggling to grasp what is happening. First time in Christian history at this point that now there's kind of a resurgence of some novel ideas, but rooted in Greco-Roman paganism too, and evolutionary atheism from the ancient world. And evolution's not new, right? We have to understand that the Greeks had concepts of evolution.
Yeah.
Right. It's really important to know that. So the churches, they're grappling, they're not sure. And at this point, especially now, in the Western world, when there's a lot of prosperity too at the same time that's coming alongside of all this stuff, they're not as concerned. You see that there's a bit of an apathy, because at the same time, guys like Leibniz and even Hume, right, and even Nietzsche, to move ahead now, we're not actively saying we do not believe in God. Right. So for a lot of Christians who aren't literate necessarily or fairly young in their education, right, and this is the people of Europe, education's growing, but they're not all at these same levels here. And your educated elite, a lot of them are now espousing ideas that are antithetical to maybe the Roman Church or to the church broadly, but they still espouse a religiosity, right? They have a spiritual life. They still believe in God, right? For most Christians, it's kind of like, okay, all right, whatever, right? Well, they still believe in God, and these ideas won't go anywhere. You see some of this too. You see, again, that apathy, nothing's going to really come of it. Well, a lot came of it, right? And I know I'm fast forwarding a lot, but this is not a history philosophy class. So let's move to Nietzsche quickly, but between Nietzsche and Kant, a lot happens, right? And just to summarize it, the conclusions of Kant, the conclusions of Hume, make their logical steps through the institutions. They move through the academic institutions amongst the elite where they're discussed. They start to get publicized more broadly by Enlightenment thinkers, right? And so people get access to them. And it starts to make people feel free, right? Because they're rebelling against the authority of the church, and the church has dominated European society, whether it's been the Protestant church now for a few hundred years or the Roman Catholic Church, right, and the church broadly for thousands of years. So it's a rebellion, a rebellious spirit, a complacency, a spirit of comfortability. Life's good. It's getting better. I don't need God as much. But these guys, these thinkers, these academics, well, they're still Christians, right? Or at least they're going to say they are. They still believe in God. So there just wasn't perhaps the need, at least the church broadly didn't see the need to comprehensively respond. Again, there were some thinkers, some Christians I mentioned who responded, Clark, Hamann, even Kierkegaard. Some were better than others, but it still wasn't a holistic biblical response. You don't start to see that until you get to the later 1800s. Right? Jonathan Edwards was much before his time in this regard, and his writing is brilliant, his philosophy is fantastic, but he's still not just generally as an entire thing. He doesn't have to. It's not a comprehensive apologetic against the new ideas of the day and age. Again, they're new to him too. He hasn't heard them all, even many that he's heard. He's living in America. America is a very, very spiritual place at that time, very religious people in every area of life. And Europeans generally still are, right? The people, broadly speaking, are not adopting those ideas yet. They're becoming public. They're becoming a little more cool and interesting. But the people, the vast, vast majority of the people are still religious through and through, Bible-believing Christians who are going to submit to the authority of the church or the scriptures, depending which denomination.
Okay, so are you saying this because of your recent experiences in Europe as you've traveled through, or are you saying it as a point of history, as a fact of history?
You mean the difference between Europe and America?
No, yeah, in the sense that despite the fact that the external society, that I would like to call that now, or the general society, seems not to be religious in Europe. And the same cannot be said for America.
Yeah.
Because, yes, in spite of the fact that we still have like a woke culture that tries to separate church and state, a lot of times the American people would still tell you or try to remind you of their strong Christian heritage. We don't see that anymore from institutions in Europe.
Not from the institutions. You are seeing a resurgence of it from the people.
Okay.
Definitely. That's why all these generally, so-called right-leaning movements, popularists and such, are making huge comebacks. Not comebacks, but they're coming into the spotlight and gaining huge political ground. And elections are moving in Europe broadly right-wing. The younger generations are wanting to reclaim their Christian heritage because they're seeing the erosion of their civilization, their culture, their society, and it's very clear what's at fault for eroding it. And it's these ideas we're talking about coming into fruition finally in the 20th and 21st century, right? And, going back to the Kantian idea of social construct, right? Well, we know that's come to its head in the 21st century. So, but back to your question, the basic friendliness, you're going to see a big, big difference between America. Now, if you go to New York, you won't. But if you go into the center of America, into the South, people are extremely friendly. And their cultures are quite different. And it has to do with their origins, right? Europe has formed over centuries of war, centuries of political turmoil, economic turmoil, and centuries of ideological turmoil. Wars that are rooted in ideological differences, whether they were so-called religious differences or just so-called philosophic, political differences. Europe's, of course, thoroughly religious. Every human being is just as religious. Their religion, however, is much more one of atheism, of skepticism, one of disbelief. And I think by and large, it's a product of a lot of turmoil and a lot of conflict on that continent for a long time. And then, again, a lot of the arrogance that have developed as European society became the predominant society in the world, the freest, the most wealthy, the most powerful. These little nations in Europe are going around the globe, conquering everything, right? So you get hot and you get arrogant. And this is just human nature again. Complacency, comfortability, power, you name it, right? Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So the more powerful they became, the more we're God. We can do this on our own. And of course, because of the conflicts in their history, there's also a lot more control over the different religious groups in European history. So for instance, right, deep battles in England between, are we going to be Catholic or are we going to be Protestant? right? No, we're not going to have ties to this other nation because now they're Catholic and we don't want their queen here. This is all this kind of stuff. This is a huge part of European history, right? The navigating of political lines with religion and ideology and war and all this stuff. America, you don't have that. What founded America? Well, it was English Puritans who didn't want to continue to live in a nation where the state was having too much control of the church and imposing things on the church that they didn't believe were biblical.
Okay.
So they left for a new world. They wanted to develop a new world with the freedom, as they believed, and you see this in the Puritans, to build God's kingdom.
I thought you also had the French Hottentots, the guys from the Netherlands, and then the Germans.
You had small coming to the New World.
Yes.
Small groups, but the original.
They kept, each and every one of them kept running for the new world.
Once it was found, once it was established. Now, of course, people have been coming there before, but like the first real colonies and settlements, these are English Puritans, right? English Calvinists, right? And you see it in the constitutions and the original documents that found Massachusetts and Connecticut and these places, right? So the origins of America are a nation that's founded on we want to find a place to worship God freely and build his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Okay. The Puritans had a very, we call it post-millennial eschatology, very hopeful eschatology. One of, no, we're going to see the conquering of God in history, right? And so anyways, the point being, so America's founded, perhaps more than any nation, right? It has a claim to be founded by Christians on biblical principles that are inscribed into their education system, their government, the dispersion of powers in their government, right? How political power is regulated, right? And restrained, right? All those kinds of things, political freedom, private property protection, right? Those are all biblical principles in the biblical law that are the grounding of a social order, and America inscribes those into law. And this is the biblical, these are Reformed Christians who are doing this in the States. So it was so much, and then America, right, as it continues to expand and such, and there's wars that happen there, but it's nothing like what Europe had gone through. And they, at that time, of course, they're the young child. When they gained their independence from England, this is not, a powerful conquering empire that's like arrogant, unlike England at that time was. This is a new child who's proud and happy to be free. And he's grateful to God for the freedom. So he builds his nation in conforming to God in God's kingdom as much as he could. So America has a very beautiful heritage, especially in its early days. There's sin along the way, of course, slavery and other things that are part of that, right? But where those big problems, where America changes, because that's not America today, right? And so anyway, I'm off topic. That's not America today. But just to finish the answer to your question, you read Montesquieu, right? One of the great 18th century French writers. And he, philosophers, political thinkers, many things he was, but he comes to America and he writes about this very clearly, right? That America is an amazing place, and that America's built on the ordinary, family-loving Christian people with a really, really strong work ethic and a really deep love for God and religion. Churches, he points, are everywhere, right? Every corner, and a church is always at the center of every town, and they're all farming communities, right? So America's kind of got a much more of a humble background, especially in these days and age. Europe is the older, bloated child, as it were, or adult parent, fat and bloated, arrogant. And is wealthy and powerful already. So it's already pushing God out a lot more. And so to this day, and again, because Roman Catholicism also has had a significant influence on the developments of European politics, it hasn't in the States.
Wow.
Right? There's certainly Roman Catholics in the States, but the predominant driving force that the French knew in the 1800s and Max Weber knew, and right, all these Europeans knew, was this Reformed Protestantism. That's the grounding of America. That's why it's so different. That's why it's way more, it's to put it bluntly, right? As Christians, we know that the more faithful you are to Scripture, the more blessings do come, and your nation will see prosperity, as God's law just makes clear, right? And we're not prosperity, health, and wealth, but it's just biblical. That's why America became far more powerful than Europe, fundamentally. That's why they are the one that everyone wants to go to America. People want to go to Europe, but everyone wants to go to America.
Yeah. No,
In Canada now.
Josh, I really am impressed with the way you have over time shown us the implications of right and wrong epistemology over time, all through well, not all through human history, so to say, but history of our world, especially from the Greeks and classical Greeks, so to say,
Christian world,
all the way through Christianity, all the way till as early as the 20th century. I know we've spoken about it a bit as to contemporary society, but you've taken your time to speak about each and every one of these conceptualizations over time. Yeah, I'm hoping that in our next conversation that we are going to begin to build from this. Yeah, because I believe that these conversations we've had so far has helped us lay the foundation. Now we need to begin to think about building the house, so that as for everybody that out there that listens to this, that through these thoughts, we are not saying that this is the best or that is all there is, but we are saying that you are going to be finding material to help equip you. Please, saints, never forget, this is about equipping the saints. So go out there, reflect on these conversations. Please go out there, be like the Berean Christians and study these conversations. Go out there and ensure that you remember that what God desires from every one of us is to remember that our faith is sufficient. In Christ is sufficient. Faith alone. Please never forget that our epistemology, like Josh has said to us over and over again, should be grounded in Scripture alone. That since God has presented Christ to us as the only way that man can be saved, we should look for salvation elsewhere. We should ensure that our salvation is rooted in Christ alone. And why is this? It's so that we can remember that it's only by God's grace and for His glory.
Amen.
Please never forget that. Josh?
I think that's a good way of just kind of summarizing it for how we as saints need to view these things and why they're important and why you need to spend time on it. And so I hope that next session, what we can do is we can kind of finish our tracing of epistemology as it developed and some of the theories of knowledge that developed into the Western world that have now kind of covered the globe. We will briefly look at Nietzsche and then follow this idea that Kant had, this idea of social construct, this idea that there's no such thing as absolutes, there's no such thing as real knowledge, there's no universal truths. Let's now see that actually play out. Let's see it come to its final, its consummation. It's that what we're seeing around us today. Right. Let's trace that and see exactly then where it ends up, and some of us already know where it ends up because we're living in it. Right. But trace that more specifically right to the end now, and then have some fun by looking at, again, those, I'd mentioned them already, some of those 20th century giants, some of those phenomenal apologists, and what they've provided us with, because they've given us excellent tools to respond to the mess that we find ourselves in, whether we're in Africa, whether we're in the East, whether we're in the West, whether we're in South America. These thinkers are robust, they're comprehensive, and their works are, they take Scripture and just, not only do they make it the foundation of their systems of thought and their understanding of faith, life, God, everything, but they do an excellent job of responding to the different ideologies that have brought our world into this current mess that we find ourselves in, at least the current situation. Sin is the primary culprit, but it takes, it's always the same thing, but it changes forms a little bit. So we'll do that next week. May the saints be equipped.
May the saints be equipped. Yeah, no, that's better.